Hi, everyone. My name is Jessie Fairbanks. I'm a features programmer for Doc NYC, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to Q&A for The Reason I Jump. Joining us today is the director, Jerry Rothwell. We're also joined by Berta and Ben McGann, who are main subjects from the film. Welcome, Jerry. Welcome, Berta. Welcome, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing The Reason I Jump with the Doc NYC audience.
Morning.
Hi.
So Jerry, I'm going to start with a question for you. You know, this is a beautiful book, beautiful film that's based off of Nuki Higashiwa's incredible book that he wrote when he was 13 years old. And the book is really well known in the autistic community. So I'm curious, you know, this film really takes us into the imagined interiority of non-speaking autistic individuals and their world of details. What made you want to make a film like this?
I think, I mean, the idea for the film first came from two of the producers, Jeremy and Stevie, who are the parents of Joss, who you meet in the film. And I think the book for them had been a kind of transformation in the way they'd sort of related to Joss. So when I came to the project through my producer Al Morrow, who they'd brought on board, I mean, I've done a lot of work with autistic people as colleagues, as in advocacy work, but the book, you know, I found also to be kind of really sort of transformative in my understanding. And so I guess my first thought was, you know, well, let's do a film about Naoki. And I went to meet with Naoki and did a research interview with him where he was using Letterboard much as Ben does. And he said, you know, yeah, great, we're excited about doing a film, but I don't want to be in it. And that's in a way why the film took the form that it did, which is that to use Naoki's words as a way of like just prompting people into the worlds of other people around the world, including Ben and Emma.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions for you about the soundscape and about the editing process, but I'd love to ask Ben and Berta what your thoughts were when you were first approached by Jerry about including Ben as a subject in a documentary. It's a pretty big ask.
Watson, listen, answer, answer, Jackson, answer, answer, listen, Jackson, answer, Jackson, listen, answer, Jackson, listen, Jackson. You said I was excited. Mm-hmm. Watson, I was excited. Jackson, awesome. Jason, Anson, awesome. Jason, Anson, Jason, Anson, Jason, Anson, Jason. I was excited to participate. Anson, Anson, Jason, Anson, 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 Jason, Anson, Watson. Listen, and enjoy. Listen, answer, answer, answer. Listen, enjoy that. Listen, good. Watson, answer, listen, listen, answer, awesome, answer, listen, listen, answer, listen. I enjoyed. Answer. 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 I was excited to participate and enjoyed the experience. Answer. 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 Watson. Answer. Answer. Answer, Jason, answer, Jason. I still get excited. Jason, answer, 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 Jason, answer, 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 Jason. I think Answer, testing, testing, answer, worsen, testing, answer, answer, testing.
So I still get excited when I think about it.
And Berta, how about you? How did you feel as Ben's mother about the idea of putting him in front of a camera? And do you mind, sorry, we can only see a little bit of your face right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, you know, Ben and I were talking earlier and I asked him what was the hardest part. He said the hardest part was just putting ourselves out there like that. And I think that this demographic of the autism population is very much hidden. Where this community is reflected in terms of their behaviors and in terms of the limitations and restrictive environments. But you know, there's lots of evidence there of the speaking autistic population, the savants and Rain Man, and you know, that's great. But these individuals have been in the shadows for a long time, and I just so applaud Jerry's initiative to bring them forward and to demonstrate their presence, their engagement, their value within the broader context of autism.
Thank you. That leads me perfectly to my next question for you, Jerry, is that, you know, Naoki's story is really well known. You know, these beautiful reenactments of him as a young man that are with narration from his book. But how did you go about identifying Ben and the additional main subjects of the film, Amrit and Joss and Emma, who Ben is good friends with, and Justina? How did you find all of the individuals in the film?
I mean, so I guess for me, early on, I kept coming up with this problem that we didn't want the people, the autistic people who are the sort of characters, if you want, with the cast of the film, to be examples of things that were in the book. You know, you didn't want Naoki to say something because partly because everyone's different and that Naoki doesn't speak for everyone, and partly because that kind of diminishes people's sort of personhood, I think. So we I mean, it's interesting that you read the young Japanese boy as the young Naoki, because I think he is potentially that, but it's never really said. And he's also possibly, you know, a sort of David Mitchell's son figure. He's maybe the spirit of the book. There's a kind of looseness about this young Japanese boy who kind of moves through these landscapes. But we did want that place to put the book that was separate from our more documentary, sort of more observational parts of the film. And then it was really a case of, like, I felt the film had a shape which maybe is a similar shape to the book, that starts you in quite a set of sensory questions about immersing you in a sort of sensory world, and then gradually kind of opens out to questions about sort of society and people's attitudes and I guess politics. So I really, when I found Amrit's work, you know, as a visual artist, it felt to me she was a great place to start the film. You know, someone who could take you into a way of seeing the world, because through her art, and through a different way of communicating than words and language. And then, you know, Joss, you know, I knew Joss obviously because he was the son of the producers, and it felt with Joss we were able to tell a story that lasted longer over time because. You know, partly he was in the UK, we could shoot more regularly with him. So Joss's scenes really take place over a couple of years, really, whereas other people we were contained to just kind of you know, a few weeks here or there. And then with Ben and Emma, really I was looking for people that could take it more into that advocacy, political realm, and Ben and Emma's communication and their participation in this group, the Tribe, that kind of advocates for people in the DC area, felt important. And then with Justina, that for me, that sort of takes it out into how a society's view of autism can shape a person's experience, and how we might begin to change that. So those were the sort of, you know, in a way, that was the sort of the way these people fitted into a shape. But I kind of feel I could have shot with anyone, actually. I mean, I'm sorry, it sounds terrible to say that, it's kind of virtually. I kind of feel like if you spend the time to immerse yourself in someone's world, the uniqueness of their own personal world would have, you know, was right.
Thank you. And Jerry, actually, that beautifully leads me into the next question. You're mentioning immersing yourself in the world. The sound design on this is incredible. It's a 360 ambient design. So if you just watched the film and you didn't watch it with surround sound or with beautiful sounds, I encourage you to go back. But can you talk to us about your artistic vision? Because you're navigating so many different individuals. You have David Mitchell talking about his son and about his translation of Naoki's work. There's so much going on. And then you have this immersive sense of this world of details. Talk to us about your artistic vision for that.
So the sound designer on the film is Nick Ryan, who's a kind of sound artist, done a lot of work around sort of sound and neuroscience, actually. And Nick is himself synesthetic, and synesthesia is something that's quite common in non-speaking autistic people. So I think Nick kind of came to it with a kind of sensibility that was sort of right for the project. And very early on, he said, you know, well, you're going to do it in 360, aren't you? And I was sort of like, oh, what? You know, I hadn't really kind of thought that through at all. But immediately went, yes, you know, whatever that is, yes, we'll do it. And what we decided, so we mix the film in Atmos, which means you can put a sound kind of anywhere out of 128 positions in a cinema. And what that enables you to do, I guess, is to draw people's attention to something which isn't central to the screen, you know. And I think that maybe is similar to the experience Naoki describes, that, you know, that a particular sound might become incredibly distracting or immersive. But we wanted to do those sounds, to use sounds that were very much from people's environment. So we sort of recorded 360 in every location. Amazing sound recordist, Sarah Lima, who ran kind of 16 tracks of audio whenever we were shooting observationally, which is quite a kind of challenge to do on your own, which she did. And then sort of built the soundtrack of the film really out of found sounds in those places mostly. I mean, okay, then Nick, you know, would build on the back of those. So, for example, the rain sequence with Amrit, you know, uses not only the sounds of rain in that place, but lots of sort of sounds that are analogous to rain, that sound like rain but aren't rain, like, you know, the crunching of a piece of paper or the tapping on a table. Or, and I think that was to try and sort of echo Naoki's words about how the concept, to get to the concept of rain, he has to kind of go through all of his memories of a particular sound to get to that concept. But yeah, so it sort of came about really through building on the things that we found in those environments, but thinking about them as isolated details.
Well, it's beautifully done and just augments what is already such a gorgeous interior experience. So thank you for sharing that with us. This is a little bit of a tricky question, but because it will touch a little bit on that consent and on allowing non-speaking individuals to speak for themselves, which Berta, you mentioned in your answer to my first question. But I'm curious about, you know, what are your thoughts now that the film is completed? Ben, this is a question for you as well. What do you think of the film now that it's completed? And how did you balance that, Berta and Ben, throughout the process with making sure that you felt that Ben was comfortable with being in front of the camera?
Answer, 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 tessa, answer, tessa, answer, answer, tessa, tessa, answer, 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 tessa, answer.
Ben said, I think we were presented in an authentic manner. And he added, it was not a performance. And I think as you know, Mama Bear, that's always my concern is that this is not a spectacle. These are individuals who are really trying very hard to navigate this world. And what we want to do is, as parents and allies, is first give them the space and then give them the agency to do just that. That's what I value in the production that Jerry led is he presented the individuals as they are in their own natural environment. And it was a typical day in the life. You know, Ben walking with Emma. That's going to be in 20 minutes. He'll be doing just that. You know, and there's always this sense that they're in another world and they don't really care and they're not really aware, and that is so far from the truth. And it's when we hear their voice that it becomes clear that they've been here all along. Ben told one of his brother's friends who said something to the effect, I never understood you and now I understand you. And Ben told the young man, I always understood you. I knew exactly what you thought. And I think it just highlights the value of communication of whatever sort. And that ability to advocate and share information is vital for the well-being of individuals. And I think that's the backstory to Ben and Emma's segment for sure.
Thank you so much, Ben and Berta. What beautiful notes to end on in terms of the time that we're living in right now. This is going to air in November, is that communication and is so important. And I'm so glad that this was a part of the film. Jerry, do you have anything that you would like to add on to that complicated question about aggregating consent and about any thoughts from the other subjects about the final film?
Yeah, I mean, I think consent is always hugely complex in documentary. It's far more than the legal requirement that we're put under of a release form being signed and that's the end of it kind of thing. For me, consent is a process through a whole production. It's like a process of talking, of showing people things that you've shot, of getting feedback on the cut, always before it's finished. So it's a kind of it's an iterative process, I think. And this on this production it's really complicated, and I think in the end I kind of took a plunge, particularly say on maybe Joss and Justina, who's harder to say for Joss and Justina that they have a consciousness about where this, I'm sure they do have a consciousness about where this film's going, but about what that means maybe is harder to make that judgment. But I think for me, it's also a bit of a choice between whether people are represented or not, and I think the invisibility of non-speaking autistic people is partly, the consequence of our believing in their inability to give consent, what I mean? And that, and the consequence of that is that generally people's stories are told as the stories of their parents. And I think the problem with that is that that's a very particular story. If you're a parent that has a child with an autism diagnosis, that's your story has its own drama, but it's not the story of that child. And it's not the story of the autistic person. So it felt, we had so many discussions about where the boundaries of different edits, particularly of Justice sequence, were in terms of in terms of consent, but sort of felt, you know, I don't know. I think the audience in the end has to judge whether we came down the right side of those things. But yeah, and in terms of showing the film back, yeah, good. Naoki watched it, was kind of happy with it, and likewise the other contributors. So that was great.
Chasing, answer, 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 chasing, chasing, answer, answer, chasing, rushing, answer, answer, chasing, watching, chasing, answer, 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 chasing, chasing, answer, 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 watching, answer, rushing, answer, chasing, closing, rushing, answer, answer, chasing, answer, 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 answer.
Ben says thank you for the opportunity to answer your questions.
Thank you so much for being here. Everyone at home, please put your hands together for the director of The Reason I Jump, Jerry Rothwell. And thank you so much to Berta and to Ben McGann for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks for screening the film.
Answer.